Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to this session here for DELIVEREE. I welcome the participants who are sitting here in Brussels, but also the people who are watching us online to the session, which is going to be a presentation on one of our projects, DELIVEREE, which is taking place in Dublin. Before I tell you a little bit about this, my name is Martin Eibl. I'm working at CINEA, the Executive Agency for Climate, Infrastructure and Environment at the European Commission. And DELIVEREE is one of the projects which has been funded already in the previous multi-annual framework, financial framework, so in the Horizon 2020 program. Many of you will still know that. And basically, in this time round, in the financial framework 21 to 27, we have a new program which is called the LIFE Clean Energy Transition Program, which is part of the LIFE program, which maybe some of you also know. It used to be the Environmental and Climate Program of the European Commission. In 2021, it has been extended by the Clean Energy Transition. And there we continue to support basically the work on promoting energy efficiency and renewable energy solutions across Europe. And DELIVEREE is one of those projects which is trying to renovate public buildings in Dublin. And I have here two speakers, Joe Hayden to my right, who is the executive manager for the project implementation team at CODEMA. CODEMA is the Dublin's energy agency, and he's a long-time experienced professional in the field of energy performance contracting. He was responsible for the first energy performance contracting with Dublin City Council. And he has a lot of good ideas, I think, on how to advance energy performance contracting. So please pick his brain later on. He has tried a lot of things, and he doesn't even shy away to rename energy performance contracting, I think. So please ask him. To my left, I've got Emily CLARKE, who is an engineer, and she's also working on CODEMA together with Joe on the project DELIVEREE. And we have now approximately half an hour for the presentation time. And after that, we will have a question and answer session. So please save your questions for later on. We will have some time after the presentation. And without further ado, I pass the micro to Joe. You have to speak in the micro because of the online audience, please.
Okay. I'm not used to microphones, so I'll try. So hello everybody. As Martin said, I'm joined here by my colleague Emily CLARKE, and we're going to introduce the DELIVEREE project. First of all, a little bit about the CODEMA. We're the energy advisors to the 4 Dublin local authorities. We were founded in 1997, and there's 32 of us based in Temple Bar now. We offer services in energy monitoring and management, energy awareness, policy planning, project management, funding. I suppose more importantly for today, we act as energy performance contracting project facilitators, in that we help the local authorities take the projects through. And we also provide training for other facilitators for this role in Ireland to try and help develop the market. And a lot of this experience came through our involvement in the 2 European projects, Guarantee and Easy 2020. I'm going to quickly take you through what we call the vision. It's what we set out to do with DELIVEREE. Emily's going to talk to you a little bit about the reality and our pipeline of projects. We're 2 years into the projects now. It's a 4-year project. And then I'm going to come in at the end and talk about the learnings, where we're at and where we see it going forward. The overall aim of DELIVEREE was to create a project implementation unit and a scalable delivery model that can be replicated in Ireland and Europe. And in parallel, so not just do the model and then test it, but a continuous testing process, was to deliver 9 signed energy performance contracts, value of 20.4 million, targeting over 140 buildings. We were doing this because we wanted to build on the experience we had to date. Before the project, we had delivered 4 performance contracts for 15 public buildings, up to a value of 3 million. We'd also facilitated an energy supply contract for the first district heating system in Ireland with Tala, up to a value of just under 8 million. But what we really wanted to replicate was the kind of investment strategy that we managed, which was bringing in 40% from the private sector and then blending grant funding for the remainder. And all of that was made possible by the use of the performance contracting models. Why do we want to do it? Because we wanted to move away from the business as usual, slow, generally single technology focused, resulting in low value projects, depending on building owner finance, leaves all the risk with the building owner, frequent cost overruns, and poor results because there's no measurement of verification, nobody's looking. Our solution is essentially the project implementation unit, but the main reason for this was to standardize the project development process and aggregate projects. So we were giving a consistent product to the market, essentially to the ESCOs. So help get common understanding. And then in parallel to use performance contracts and facilitate that private finance. We have established the project implementation unit now, which sits within CINEA. So there's 5 of us, more or less, and some others come and go. And what we're trying to do is follow this 5-step kind of project implementation process. So we had this in kind of, it's kind of a step we're following before, but now we're trying to actually formalize it and put it into procedures and protocols. So taking it, project identification, then standardization, which is basically doing initial legal, technical, financial checks for a project to see if it's fit to go forward. If it does, it kind of gets a green light, goes forward to aggregation, where there's another series of checks, and then into procurement and finance, because that's the model we were bringing into private finance to date, and then on to contract management and M&V. And Emily has been developing all the procedures and protocols, which she'll mention a little bit after. We have identified a pool of 19 projects. It's kind of a loose grouping, really, but to start with, 140 buildings, 20 million capex. We had estimated savings at 29%, but you'll see after we're kind of revising that now to look at maybe much greater savings in a smaller number of buildings as opposed to kind of a small number of savings over large number of buildings, and to replicate that funding structure as well was the key. Project partners, ourselves, the 4 Dublin local authorities, and then we have 3 private sector partners which specialise in legal and finance, to make sure anything we're developing is obeying all the rules. And then we also have a project advisory board, which is members of the 2 government departments, the National Development Finance Agency, the Joseph Stefan Institute in Slovenia, because we're copying a lot of what they did before, SEAI in Ireland, and then an ESCO and other facilitator and property owner representatives. That's the whistle-top tour of DELIVEREE in terms of what we aim to do. I'm going to hand over to Emily now, who's going to take you a little bit through what we actually achieved today.
Thanks, Joe. So I'm just going to talk about the reality of the project so far, so what we've done so far, and then I'll talk a bit about the projects we're currently working on. So the first major output of the project was the guidance document, and this was the main deliverable of Work Package 2. We basically did a lot of research and interviewed around 14 experts, EPC experts across Ireland and Europe. And the result of this was a report that looked at the EPC market from the communication, risk, technical, procurement, finance, and legal angles. So there were quite a few findings from this report, but I'm just going to mention one here, which was a lack of shared understanding of what EPC is. So in response to this, we developed a contract cheat sheet, which is on the screen here, which basically just runs through our contract and the different elements of the contract, such as the distribution of risk, the design, the maintenance, the services, the guarantee, and it basically defines how a standard works contract would approach it, and then how we approach it from the EPC's perspective. So this is to kind of get ourselves on the same page as the people we're talking to when we talk about EPC. So the second deliverable was the output of Work Package 3, which are a number of protocols and procedures for how to develop an energy efficiency or renewable energy project, basically. So it runs through the project development process from the project identification right through to contract signing and then contract management beyond that. So it also includes a number of standardized template documents so we can have quality control over our outputs to the clients. So initially we developed this in quite a static structure in Word documents and Excel form, but we realized as we started working on the project that it would be useful to have a much more live version of this. So what we've done is develop an online platform for this using an online database software. So basically this is a central place for everything related to the project implementation unit. So it is a central place to understand the project development process. So we've uploaded all the protocols and procedures to this to access the templates, to record the progress on the project development, and also importantly to record communications, because this was another finding of the guidance document, that it's really important to keep on top of communications. So basically any of our team members can log into this software and see the latest updates on any of the projects. So another output that we have produced so far is the gap to target analysis. So basically before we started jumping into developing the projects, we wanted to make sure that the pipeline was relevant. So we wanted to make sure that basically that the pipeline is working towards meeting the local authorities' emissions targets. So what we did here was we looked at the building portfolio and we took the top 80% of energy consuming buildings because this is where the biggest savings can be made. And with these buildings, we did some audits, we had some existing audits, and we consulted with the client to come up with a number of assumed upgrades for each building. And then this allowed us to put savings against that and come up with a savings figure for each local authority, which we could then plug back into the gap to target analysis to make sure we're on track. Each local authority is on track to meet the targets. And so we've done a first version of this, but this will be an iterative process. So if the building portfolio changes or if the planned projects change, we'll keep updating that and plugging it back into the gap to target to make sure we're constantly on track to meet the targets. So now I'm just going to run through some of the projects that we're currently working on. So this first one here is an energy performance contract with Dunleary Rathdown County Council, which is one of the 4 Dublin local authorities. So the estimated project value is around 3.1 million euros, and this is looking at 3 buildings within the council. So they're large offices, the county hall, a large library, and a theatre. And the idea of this project is to do holistic upgrades. So this will include possibly some building fabric, renewable heat, BMS, LED upgrades, solar PV, among other smaller upgrades. And the financing for this is 45% client, 45% grant funding, and 10% ESCO. So the next project here is a similar project with one of the other Dublin local authorities. So this is with South Dublin County Council. It's also an energy performance contract to the value of around 2.5 million euros. And this is looking at 5 of their buildings. So they're large civic offices, smaller offices, a theatre, and 2 leisure centres with pools. And again, here we're looking at holistic upgrades to the buildings. And the financing for this is 35% client, 39% grant funding, and the ESCO will bring in the remainder. And then We also have a couple of other projects that we're considering with, that we're developing with South Dublin County Council at a decommissioned landfill site. So firstly, we're looking at a small-scale solar PV project, which will be an energy performance-related payment contract. So this is basically a standard works contract with a guarantee clause. And this is likely to be around 200 kilowatts of solar. And here the client will bring in 90% of the funding upfront, so around 275,000 euros, and then it will retain the remainder, which will be paid on proof of performance of the system. And then the next project we're looking at this site is a large-scale solar PV project. So we're currently at feasibility study stage with this. So we've got a feasibility study procured to look at the financing, the grid connection, the planning, and everything. But at the moment, we expect this to be around 5 megawatts and a value of around 6 million euros. So with another Dublin local authority, Fingal County Council, we're looking at a couple of projects. The first one is a solar PV project, which will be procured using an energy supply contract. And the value of this is expected to be around 460,000 euros, and that will be around 320 kilowatts of solar across 3 buildings. And similarly, we have another energy supply contract looking at installing biomass boilers across 4 of their buildings as well, which will be a project value of approximately 500,000 euros. And then finally, we're also looking at an energy performance contract with some of the Mid-East county councils, so Meath, Kildare and Wicklow County Council. And the project value for this is around 3.8 million euros. And this is looking at 7 of their leisure centres with swimming pools. And again, we're looking at upgrading the buildings holistically. So this may include some fabric, definitely include renewable heat, BMS upgrades, LED, solar PV, etc. And the financing for this is around 45 to 50% from the client, 30 to 45% grant funding, and 10 to 20% ESCO. So yeah, now I'll pass it back to Joe, who's going to talk about our learnings.
Very good. Thanks, Emily. How are we doing on time? What? 15. Okay, great. Perfect. Oh, wait, no, wrong button. Okay, so what I mentioned at the beginning, what we set out to do was essentially to build upon our experience that we had to date with delivering projects, especially the kind of finance split and the energy performance contracting model. What we hadn't fully appreciated at the time was the shift from energy efficiency to decarbonisation. I'm going to talk about that now. And the impact that had both on how the EPC model itself works and how we could bring it in private finance. And it's basically that if you have an energy efficiency focus, financial savings are the key. But if you're taking decarbonisation, it's CO2 savings. And when you go decarbonisation, you're generally spending a lot more money and you're not saving as much. Very good CO2 savings, very good kilowatt hour savings, often very little or no financial savings. And that has a big impact. So I'm going to take you through our kind of thought process and where we got to for various things. The first one was reviewing our project pipeline. So Emily mentioned the gap to target and that analysis and making sure everything lined up with targets. So because we have 4 local authority with hundreds of buildings, we thought we would have hundreds of projects. But then the climate action plans in Ireland came in, and the focus is on direct emission savings, and that's emissions from space heating and transport fuels, mainly for the local authorities, and less so on electricity, because the electricity grid is going to decarbonise itself at the national level. So essentially, we're looking at just turning everything electric in the buildings. That's our decarbonisation strategy in a way, because then it all decarbonises on time. When you look at that and you look at our building portfolio, with this perspective, you can start to see pictures like this, where you have a small number of buildings with a huge impact and a lot of other buildings with little or no impact. And that's Dunleary Local Authority. This is Dublin City Council, slightly different picture because they have a lot more buildings, a lot more larger buildings, but the same trend. But then with the other two local authorities, you can see once you come down from the few larger buildings, there's little or no impact in terms of projects. So that made us reshift our focus and say, instead of looking at the 30%, now we're looking at total decarbonisation of these large buildings and 70 to 80% energy savings if we can get them. And we will do some of the smaller projects if they're right, but they're not the focus. And I suppose that was a first learning and a first shift. The second was then how do you deal with these buildings? And this chart came out of a lot of confused conversations over the first year with the local authorities and ourselves, a back and forth. Are we doing deep retrofit? Are we doing fabric? What's EPC? Where does that go? How does this all work together? And we found we couldn't actually clearly answer the questions because we didn't understand ourselves. So a lot of internal meetings and conversations, we came up with this, which is we call our building decarbonisation strategy. And the idea is that you take your full list of buildings and you either split them into deep retrofit, which is a building site, which is in the simple terms, and decarbonisation, which is a live building. And if your building is ready for decarbonise or deep retrofit, then that is the ideal. You go for it. But it is turning your building into a building site. It's the fabric first approach. It's what we all know well. But the problem is, in reality, there's a lot more things, a lot more factors going into make a decision to turn a building, a public building, into a building site than just energy efficiency or decarbonisation. Because you might have to decant it, there's a lot. So a lot of the time buildings are not ready for that. So if they're not ready, then what next? So if now is not the right time, then we're saying decarbonisation. And decarbonisation is more of a, bottom up is not the right term here, but with the arrow, it's where you focus on starting the plant room essentially. Get rid of the fossil fuel systems. If that's all you have to do, great, if the building's relatively new, but it might not. There might be knock-on consequences to the fabric and other elements. But in that way, you're just doing what's enough there. And you're probably biding the time before the time comes when you really do have to deep retrofit that building. But it's to make sure that we don't get stuck in a kind of paralysis. I can't deep retrofit the building. I'm not going to do anything. Oh, we'll just replace the boiler. So we're looking at a more holistic building decarbonisation. Or, as Emily explained with some of the projects, the smaller buildings, maybe a supply contract with a biomass boiler replacement or something like that. Then, coming out of that same analysis, we have this kind of idea of when to use EPC and when to go traditional. And I'll be honest, I'm not fully convinced by this slide myself yet. I'm still trying to work it out. But the idea here is that we split all of the... It was kind of coming from a deep retrofit example I had from a leisure centre at home where I had all of the costs. And we split them into fabric, M&E infrastructure, and that by mean air handling units, ducting, fans, and then plumbing and electrical. And then what I call production and controls, your heat pumps, your biomass boilers, your solar PV, and all of that. And I was looking at the fabric measures. We're split each one into terms of payback and performance risk. And by performance risk, I mean if a measure is, the likelihood that if a measure is installed as designed, that it won't perform, with that active management. So if you take something like windows or wall insulation, if you put them in properly, you don't have to look at them again. They're going to do what it is they were supposed to do. But if you put in a biomass boiler or a heat pump, it's not just going to work away by itself. It needs to be actively managed and maintained and all of that. So the first one is very low performance risk. The second one has very high performance risk. And I was looking at this, trying a kind of an EPC lens as well. With a deep retrofit situation, you're looking at here where you've got, for your first to measure, you've got 60% of your CapEx, which are very low performance risk, very high cost, long payback, not very attractive for the EPC model, whereas your production and your control equipment are. So what we're kind of saying in a roundabout way here is that If we're going for a deep retrofit, we'd probably go traditional contracting all the way. But if we're going decarbonisation and a full holistic decarbonisation, then performance contracting is the way to go. I'm still figuring that out myself, but it's getting there. Once we had all our kind of projects together, and this is where we are, the stage we're at now with some of the projects we're going to market, but here we're facing the same problems that have been around for years and we've been discussing for years. And I kind of sum it up as a lack of projects and a lack of ESCOs. It's a kind of a supply and demand issue where there's a lot more to it. I won't get in here, but that's what it is. Some of the main reasons we're seeing now, especially with the lack of ESCOs, is that the bid cost risk is increasing dramatically as we shift from energy efficiency and kind of tried and tested models of putting in a CHP or a new condensing boiler to asking them to look at full decarbonisation. You know, getting into windows and insulation and heat pumps and going from a high temperature to a low temperature system. It's a high cost risk for them. So some of them are just saying, no, we're not going to bid on your project. Coupled with that is the fact that there's lots of projects out there in the private sector. So we have to compete for ESCOs now. And then I think on top of that, the standard EPC model no longer works and is not what we need. And there's kind of two things in this. Why it no longer works, I think the savings no longer pay for the measures. So that idea of EPC is gone when you go to decarbonisation. But the other one is that traditionally EPC has focused on installing new equipment and maintaining that new equipment in your building. But as a building owner, we want the holistic energy system looked after. The old and the new, the existing. It's not good enough that a new part works really well if the old parts are not performing. And that's what our model is looking at. So to try and address this, we're going to hold an event in 13th November in Dublin where we're inviting the main market stakeholders, so the contractors, the market facilitators, so the people like ourselves, and the building portfolio owners. And the idea is kind of to look at the challenges faced by each stakeholder and see can we come up with better solutions. So we can, more from a selfish point of view, so I can put a project out to the market that I know I'm going to get a bid on. And that kind of leads into the final point where when we talk about EPC now, we kind of, as what Martin alluded to earlier, I'm going to stop. I said I would stop using EPC and just use design, build, operate, and maintain because it's a much less loaded term, but pretty much means the same thing. And what's recognizing is that deep retrofitting existing buildings, it's really messy. New builds and, well, decarbonising existing buildings is really messy. Deep retrofit, you get the chance to strip it back to its core, so it becomes more like a new build. But if you're going in to decarbonise a building, it's just a mess. Like one of our buildings has 3 different wings from 3 completely different areas, so 3 different fabrics. It's got mechanical systems in one, it's got a BMS and a bit of a half of another. It's, they're all over the place, but we have to do it live. So what we see as EPC as a structure that we can do a phased decarbonisation of these buildings, and I think this is going to be very important. So EPC will allow us to phase out existing assets, boilers, CHPs, that may be relatively recent installations and have a structured plan for replacement. So we can get in day one and get rid of what's really obviously bad. But some of our leisure centres have only got a CHP that's 5 or 6 years old. We're not going to throw that out now, but it is a big gas thing, so we need a plan for phasing it out. And the EPC gives us a contract structure to do that within. So the contractor can prepare an implementation plan, and then the building owner can go and prepare a structured investment plan to go with that. Now, there's a lot of complexities in that, and there's a lot of things we have to figure out, and contractually and financially, but that's the only way I can see forward. But from a procurement point of view, and I always have this in, when you do EPC procurement, you're doing all your procurement once for the next 10 years or whatever for your building. Or if you do it individually, you're going to repeat that over and over again. So while it may be a little bit more complex at first, it's, you're doing it all up front. And I think we can't go forward. Can we go to the next slide? I've done something. There's only one slide left anyway. Sorry, it won't go forward. I have 2 slides left. Sorry, I forgot about these ones. So finally, just I put in 2 examples at the end of I got a financial analysis of energy efficiency project that we used to do before and the decarbonisation projects that we're doing now, just to show you the difference. And I appreciate like this, one of them is probably from 2019 and the other's 22, so there's a little bit of inflation shift in the figures. But this first example was an energy efficiency project for 3 leisure centres. So we put in 1 CHP, I think, and then there's some boilers, BMS controls, the usual stuff. The investment was 550,000. There was no grant aid, and we were getting just under 2 gigawatt hours of savings. So that's what I would call an energy efficiency focus. Now, with our decarbonisation head on, we're looking at a building, different building types, office and library. But here we're looking at heat pump, windows, solar PV, BMS controls, LED lighting. We're looking to spend 3.1 million for 1.8 gigawatt hours of savings. So dramatically increased the cost for slightly less savings or more or less comparable savings. And we need 50% grant funding. And if you look at it here, what you can see, where is it going? So of the 3.1 million, 40% of that is going for windows, which have a 90-year probably payback. You know, it's somewhere in that. And then the heat pumps are 25% of the costs, which in this case have no savings. So they actually add to the cost. But that's decarbonisation. We still have a positive NPV, so it's still a good project, still works, but we do need that grant aid to support. So essentially the grant is almost taking the heat out of these 2 things. So in terms of finance going into the project, you know, it might be better off to strip out the fabric or those low risk, no performance measures and finance them in a different way and, you know, not have finance coming in through the ESCO. So those are some of the questions we're looking at now. So in conclusion then, we are looking now to kind of reframe the EPC message that we're talking about. So from what I call from a building owner perspective, so that's maybe coming from the experience as a facilitator, to focus on that contracted renovation roadmap or pathway to zero. And that's very much supported in the new directives. I think in the EPBD anyway, can't remember the term, but we're also looking to engage with the ESCO market to gain a better understanding of the challenges and the risks that they face so we can present a better project to the market. That's critical for any sorts of success. It's kind of meeting both ways. We're evaluating the pathways for private finance, as I just mentioned, so to kind of recognise that high cost, low risk measures. So maybe there's different ways to try and keep that finance cost down. We're looking to further develop that contract selection process that I mentioned, you know, whether we use traditional or EPC. I was very much EPC always. Now I'm kind of, there is a role for traditional contracting. And then finally, then we need to redevelop our EPC contract template to recognise this more staged renovation process and maintenance that goes with it, because what we have now is not fit for purpose in that. And how we bring in how you procure that is a big problem. How do you procure something that might be installed in 4 years' time? So there are issues around that and how you finance that. But that's where we're thinking at now. So thank you.
Yes. Thanks very much, Joe and Emily, for the nice presentation. I think it was very detailed and there was a lot of information, which you can see that Emily and Joe, they have worked a long time on the topic already, and it's an evolving topic. Energy performance contracting is not new, as you know. We talk about it already for decades, I would say. So it's just a matter of whether it's the right tool, for what it's the right tool, and how we can actually scale up the solutions there to actually get the clean energy transition going. But we have now a little bit of time, 10 minutes for questions, if there are any questions from the floor. If you have a question, please say your name, and please keep your question very short so that we can take also other questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Ali Hainoun from Austrian Institute of Technology. We used to work with CODIMA in the past in another project, I think. So my question has 2 parts. The first is, how you pick out your project. It is based on a clean energy transition strategy or decarbonization strategy. You prepare for the city, and after that you said, "Go, those are the priorities where I have the most potential." Or it is the question how I secure the funding and financing for a certain project, then I decide in which project I would start. The second part is about resilient, because we speak about deep decarbonization or deep retrofitting, but the challenge is about adaptation. We should not do it in traditional way now, but rather to think about we need to make our cities more resilient. I mean, not only the traditional way, we need to prepare to the extreme events, storming, heat, and so on. That could include more additional financing. How do you deal with this situation? Thank you.
Okay. The first point, I would like to say it's a very structured process of doing the gap to target. There's a little bit of that. We do help the local authorities to look at their major buildings and tell them where we should target. But the reality is we have to listen to what they want to do as well. So it's a little bit of both. It's less so about the funding coming into it at the moment in Ireland, but it's more about where often, because there are lots of other factors under an energy efficiency coming in there. So one of the big problems in our first project, with the reason why we're replacing the windows is really because they're drafty and people are complaining about them. Now, we'll need it for the heat pump, but it's almost a personal, they want to make it comfortable. And that's a kind of a driving factor. So the project selection process, we have this lovely idea that we'd have lots of projects coming in and then we'll divide them up and aggregate them. But as you can see, we have some projects that are 200,000 or 300,000, some that are a million. That's because we have to listen to them. They're saying, no, we don't want this project complicated. We just want to go ahead with this one. And we don't want to wait anymore. And we don't. So it's a little bit of that. So strategy first from us, kind of advising them. But within that, there are all sorts of other projects. So it is a bit of a mix. The resilience issue, we haven't. To be honest, we haven't really considered it so much yet, but I'm going to have to add it in now. Definitely flooding would be a big issue for us in Ireland, so in certain parts. We're lucky enough that we don't have to deal with earthquakes or anything like that at the moment, but yeah, I think it's just another added issue. We probably depend on the building regulations there as well, so what's enforced on us from that point of view.
Thanks very much. Any other question from the floor? Please raise your hand. No. I have a question here from the chat to you, Joe. You said the savings no longer pay for the cost of the measures. Don't the payback period of your case studies show that they do in fact pay back quickly?
Yeah, I suppose we're supplementing it with grant funding. Okay. That's the answer there. Yeah. So we kind of took a policy that where we, as much as possible, like to keep our EPC contracts to around 10 years, 8 years if possible, 6 years, but not going into the 20-25 years. If you take away the grant funding, then you're into very long contracts. Okay. And I don't think they're as attractive to anybody.
And basically, if you talk about deep retrofit, I mean, we always talk about a grant component, isn't it, in the whole financing?
It's that last slide that I showed with the heat pump, and you can see that the windows were 40% of the capex, and the heat pump's 25. Neither of them offering any meaningful payback. So.
Maybe a follow-up question on this one. If you talk about grant funding, and often probably it's EU grant funding, so structural funds or RRF or something like that, how does that impact on your project planning? Because you know that the EU funds are structured every sort of 7 years, and then the national authorities have to implement that and so on. Is that a kind of barrier, or is it some facilitating the process in Ireland? I mean, how is it for structuring the whole financing of your investment projects?
Yeah, I think for the European funding, it has been less, I suppose, because DELIVEREE is paying for the facilitation service essentially. So that's allowed us to at least project out and map over a number of years. But we have a grant funding element coming into this, which is a national funding possibly has an EU source, but I'm not sure if it is. But it has been significantly delayed in getting to us, and it slowed down all our projects to a lot. So we've lost about a year in waiting for a contract to be signed for funding. So it can be a delay. It's almost grant funding if it's not there and ready and the mechanisms are not clear and simple, can be more of a barrier than a help.
Okay. I mean, we have heard that also from other projects that if you really depend also on EU grants, basically, structural funds or things like that, that sometimes it might be really quite difficult if you want to sign up contracts with public authorities who are waiting actually for this grant funding to come into place. There's an application process, of course, involved, which takes time and has deadlines. And then it's also a matter of these programs being actually accessible to the project promoters so that you can then build together your financing. Okay, there was a question here from the lady. If you can say your name, organization, and very quick question.
Yes, thank you, Joe, for your presentation. I'm Victoria Terrano from PPIE. We're involved in two Horizon projects on positive energy neighborhoods. And my question is related to that because we're looking a bit into ESCO financing models to finance these big renovation projects at the neighborhood scale. So we're talking about projects between 20 and 60 million capex. So my first question is, can ESCO be covering part of this capex? Because this would be like the model of deep renovation that you had like with traditional contracting. Because yeah, we aim for deep renovation and it's a lot of this, smart systems, energy modeling, renewables that add a lot to extra costs compared to business as usual. Can EPC cover part of the technologies? I don't know, the smart systems or like the PV part. And my second question is because our demos on social housing go very well, but we have issues with private housing associations. So even if 55% is covered but with public funds, they're not willing to contribute with the rest 45%. So do you think ESCO would be interested in when they're, the client is housing associations, or it's just fit for like public clients?
But there are models, I suppose, of ESCO involvement in housing, definitely. But it is more complicated than it is with the public sector or with public buildings. I think where we're thinking, people normally talk about EPC and ESCOs in financing. They always go together in the same breath. And I suppose we're trying to separate that in a way, because to me, the only reason I would use an ESCO is to manage the performance risk. So I'm kind of coming to the conclusion, if you've got measures such as the fabric measures and that have no performance risk, then getting financing from an ESCO is the most expensive way of getting that funding. So there's probably other traditional ways of getting it. I'm not a finance expert. I'm still teasing through this, but that's where our thinking is at. And where we want to use the ESCO is to manage the performance risk of these decarbonisation measures. So the active ones, you said that the solar is probably low risk, but there's a risk. But the heat pumps and the commissioning and the operation and the whole idea of the rebound effect. I have a slide I always use on the performance gap. There was Innovate UK did a report where they followed 50 NZ buildings, more or less, or low energy buildings over 5 years. And they found, technically those buildings have everything they needed in equipment wise, but the performance gap was 3.5. They were emitting 250% more CO2 than they should have been. And it was purely just performance management and commissioning. And the worst case buildings were 10 times more. So I think that's, to me, where we need an ESCO. Them bringing in funding can be a help, but it's not the main thing. So I think that's why we need to rethink the ESCO model. There's definitely a role for it. It's definitely really important, but it probably isn't part of your building. So you might just separate your project and finance some of it in one way and another way. And the housing then it's complicated.
Yes, thanks very much, Joe. I have a final question, and then we have actually to close this session. I mean, if you ever thought of cheating, this project has developed a contract cheat sheet. So, I mean, if you ever had this thought, I want to cheat, then I think in this context, it might be a positive thing. Is your contract cheat sheet and also these protocols you refer to, are they fit for purpose for these practitioners who come from across Europe? I mean, can they take that somehow, or is it usable? Can they go to your website and download and use them?
Not all of it yet, but some of it is. Yeah. Do you want to?
The guidance document is on the website, and that includes the cheat sheet. I'd say maybe the cheat sheet is specific to our contract, but yeah, learnings could be.
Replicable?
Yeah, I think what we've learned a lot is communication is really important, and we're trying to soften the language and change the language and get through. So using the term like cheat sheet was kind of just to engage people and get in, but it's trying to recognise the fact that I've been so many times, I've done many arguments times of sat through arguments of what is an ESCO, through the very professional people of what is EPC was a joke before that we just didn't discuss. But we have to get past that, and that's what we were trying to get at with the cheat sheet. We need almost like a taxonomy for these terms. So at least when we're in a room here together, that we all are having the same conversation and not taking different meanings from it. And that's a challenge. But we have, our tools will be available. We're probably really getting to test out the Airtable and the PIU, project management tool. But once that is, I'd say within a year, probably we'll definitely have it all up on our website and with all the procedures and protocols. It would be unfair to release them on you now because I think we're still working them out. Okay,
super. So there's more to come. So watch this project. I would like to thank Emily and Joe for the presentation. Thank you very much. A round of applause, please. And if you are interested in the next project, which is presentation, which is taking place here, we have the Smarter Finance for EU, which is improving energy security and citizens' lives through EU taxonomy-aligned green homes and green finance. If not, then please make your way to the other rooms in Ballroom and Studio 4, where you find in Studio 4 one-stop shops to support energy communities, and in Ballroom a remarkable project on climate leaders stimulating investment towards carbon neutrality. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thanks.